April 29, 1945. The island of Okinawa. A 400-foot escarpment rises from the Pacific landscape like a jagged wound in the earth. American soldiers call it Hacksaw Ridge, and they're dying there by the dozen. Machine gun fire cuts through the tropical air. Mortars explode in cascading waves. Bodies litter the volcanic rock. And in the middle of this hell, one man moves without a rifle, without a pistol, without even a combat knife. His name is Desmond Doss, and by sunrise, he will save more lives in a single night than most soldiers will fire bullets in an entire war. The Battle of Okinawa represents the bloodiest engagement in the Pacific theater. 82 days of savage combat. Over 12,000 American casualties. The Japanese defenders, entrenched in a network of caves and tunnels, fight with suicidal determination. They know Okinawa is the last stepping stone before the invasion of mainland Japan. Every ridge, every hill, every meter of coral rock is defended to the death. Hacksaw Ridge is the key to the entire operation. This towering cliff face dominates the southern approach to the Japanese stronghold at Shuri Castle. Take Hacksaw, and the path opens to the heart of enemy defenses. Fail, and thousands more will die in the coming weeks. The 77th Infantry Division, battle-hardened from campaigns across the Pacific, draws the assignment. They fought on Guam, on Leyte, in the Philippines. They consider themselves among the finest combat units in the United States Army. But Hacksaw Ridge is different. The Japanese have transformed it into a killing ground. Artillery zeroed to perfection. Interlocking fields of machine gun fire. Grenades rolled down the slope into advancing Americans. The ridge lives up to its name. It cuts men apart like a serrated blade through flesh. On April 29th, the 77th Infantry launches its assault. They scale cargo nets thrown over the cliff face, hand over hand, rifles slung across their backs. They reach the top exhausted, muscles burning, only to run directly into a wall of steel and fire. Within minutes, the ridge top becomes a slaughterhouse. Men fall backward off the escarpment. Others drop where they stand, torn apart by shrapnel. The wounded cry out from the coral outcroppings, pinned down, unable to move. And then comes the order every soldier dreads: retreat. Pull back. Leave the wounded. Save who you can save. The decimated companies stumble back down the cargo nets, leaving dozens of men behind. Some are already dead. Others are dying. A few cling to life, bleeding into the volcanic soil, waiting for night to fall or for a bullet to end their suffering. Except one man doesn't retreat. One man stays behind. One man, armed with nothing but a canvas medic bag and an unshakable conviction, refuses to leave. Desmond Thomas Doss was never supposed to be a combat soldier. Born in Lynchburg, Virginia, in 1919, he grew up in a devoutly religious household. His father, a carpenter, struggled with alcoholism and the psychological scars of the First World War. His mother, a shoe factory worker, raised Desmond and his siblings in the Seventh-day Adventist faith, a denomination that observes Saturday as the Sabbath and adheres to strict biblical literalism. Two experiences shaped Desmond's core beliefs about violence. The first came from a framed poster hanging in his childhood home. It depicted the Ten Commandments, with special emphasis on the sixth, "Thou shalt not kill." Desmond would stare at that illustration, Cain standing over Abel's murdered body, and feel the weight of those words settle into his bones. The second came during a family fight. Desmond's father, drunk and enraged, pulled a gun during an argument with Desmond's uncle. Young Desmond watched his mother step between the two men, begging, pleading. He watched her take the weapon and hide it. He never forgot the look in his father's eyes, the realization of what he'd almost done. From that moment, Desmond vowed he would never touch a firearm in anger. When Pearl Harbor burned on December 7, 1941, Desmond faced an impossible choice. His faith commanded peace. His country demanded war. He could have claimed exemption as a conscientious objector. The Seventh-day Adventist Church would have supported him. But Desmond saw a third path. He would serve. He would deploy to combat. He would face the same dangers as any other soldier. But he would serve as a medic, saving lives instead of taking them. The Army didn't know what to make of Private Desmond Doss. His insistence on keeping the Saturday Sabbath created immediate friction. His refusal to even touch a rifle during basic training marked him as different, suspect, possibly cowardly. His fellow soldiers despised him. They called him a coward, a weakling, a holy Joe hiding behind his Bible. They threw boots at him while he prayed at night. They threatened him. They beat him. His commanding officers weren't much better. They tried to have him discharged on psychiatric grounds. They assigned him to the most degrading duties. They did everything short of a court-martial to force him out. Captain Jack Glover, his company commander, later admitted he thought Doss was the worst soldier he'd ever seen, a liability who would get men killed. But Doss possessed something beyond physical strength or marksmanship. He had an absolute, unbreakable conviction. He knew, not believed, but knew, that God had called him to serve as a medic. No amount of abuse or intimidation could shake that certainty. When his unit deployed to the Pacific, Desmond Doss went with them, still refusing to carry a weapon, still determined to prove that faith and courage were not mutually exclusive. His first combat came during the Battle of Guam. While other soldiers stormed Japanese positions with rifles and grenades, Doss followed behind with his medic bag. He treated wounds under fire. He dragged injured men to safety. He earned grudging respect, though many still questioned whether he'd hold up in truly desperate circumstances. Leyte came next. The Philippines Campaign. More brutal combat, more wounded soldiers, more opportunities for Doss to demonstrate his skills. He developed techniques for moving wounded men while staying low. He learned to identify the sounds of different weapons by ear, calculating danger zones even before he saw the enemy. He became, against all expectations, an exceptional combat medic. But nothing in Guam or Leyte prepared anyone for Hacksaw Ridge. The 77th Infantry Division arrived on Okinawa in late April 1945. They knew the island would be their toughest fight yet. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. Tens of thousands of Japanese defenders, elaborate fortifications, civilians used as shields or sacrificed in suicide attacks. The southern portion of the island, where Hacksaw Ridge dominated the landscape, represented the strongest defensive line the Americans had yet encountered. On April 28th, the day before the main assault, reconnaissance patrols tested the Japanese defenses. They were thrown back with heavy losses. Officers studied maps and aerial photographs, trying to find a weakness in the ridge's defenses. They found none. The assault would be frontal, bloody, and potentially futile. But it had to be attempted. The cargo net swayed against the cliff face as men climbed, hand over hand, rifles banging against their backs. Desmond Doss climbed with them, his medic bag considerably heavier than any rifle. He carried morphine syrettes, sulfa powder, bandages, plasma, tourniquets, everything he might need to keep a man alive long enough to get him off the ridge. The first wave reached the top just after dawn. Immediately, machine gun fire swept across the exposed plateau. Japanese defenders, concealed in fortified positions, opened up with devastating accuracy. Mortars bracketed the American positions. Grenades sailed through the air. Within the first hour, casualties mounted into the dozens. Doss went to work. A private caught a burst of machine gun fire across his chest. Doss crawled to him through the crossfire, stuffed the wounds with gauze, administered morphine. The private died anyway, bleeding out despite everything Doss could do. Another soldier stepped on a mine, his legs shredded below the knees. Doss applied tourniquets, called for stretcher bearers. They never came. The ridge was too hot, the killing too concentrated. All morning, the battle raged. American soldiers pushed forward meter by meter, then were driven back by counterattacks. Japanese defenders emerged from spider holes and tunnels, throwing grenades, firing at point-blank range, then disappearing back underground. The coral rock offered little cover. Bullets ricocheted at crazy angles. Artillery fire churned the already devastated landscape into a moonscape of craters and rubble. By mid-afternoon, the assault had stalled completely. Companies that began the day at full strength were reduced to scattered squads. The wounded outnumbered the able-bodied. Ammunition ran low. Water ran out. The tropical heat, combined with the physical exertion and psychological strain, pushed men to the breaking point. And then came the order, withdraw. The ridge couldn't be held. The casualties were too heavy. Pull back, regroup, try again tomorrow. Officers passed the word down the line. Soldiers began the dangerous descent back down the cargo nets, helping the walking wounded, leaving behind those too injured to move. Desmond Doss heard the order. He saw his fellow soldiers retreating. He looked across the ridge top at the wounded men scattered among the rocks. 50, 60, maybe 75 men too injured to move on their own. Some cried out for help. Others lay silent, conserving their strength, hoping against hope for rescue. The Japanese defenders, sensing victory, intensified their fire. Anyone who remained on the ridge after dark would face almost certain death. Doss made a decision that defied every military principle, every survival instinct, every rational calculation. He stayed, alone, unarmed, in the middle of the most concentrated killing ground in the Pacific Theater. He crawled to the nearest wounded soldier, a kid from Kentucky with a stomach wound. Doss bandaged him as best he could, then dragged him to the edge of the escarpment. He'd fashioned a rope sling from their supply lines, a makeshift stretcher that could be lowered down the cliff face. He tied the wounded soldier into the sling, secured the ropes, and lowered him over the edge. Then he crawled back for another. The work was impossibly dangerous. Every time Doss exposed himself, Japanese gunners opened fire. Bullets whipped past his head. Mortar rounds exploded close enough to shower him with coral fragments. But he moved with a strange calmness, as if protected by something beyond luck or skill. Later, he would say he prayed continuously, "Lord, please help me get one more. Just one more." He found a soldier with both legs broken, bone protruding through flesh. Doss splinted the legs with rifle stocks. He wouldn't carry weapons, but he'd use them to save lives, and dragged the man back to the edge. Down he went in the rope sling. One more. A sergeant with a sucking chest wound. Doss sealed the wound with a petroleum jelly dressing, administered morphine, lowered him to safety. One more. A private whose face had been torn open by shrapnel. Doss could see teeth through the man's cheek. He bandaged the wound, whispered encouragement, sent him down the cliff. Hours passed. The sun began to set. Japanese soldiers moved closer, searching for American holdouts to kill. Doss hid among the rocks, waited for them to pass, then continued his work. He found men buried under rubble, crushed by artillery fire but still breathing. He dug them out with his bare hands. One more. A lieutenant with multiple fragment wounds. One more. A radio man with a severed arm. One more. A rifleman paralyzed by a spinal injury. The rope sling went up and down, up and down. Each time, Doss tied it off, checked the knots, lowered another wounded soldier to the relative safety at the base of the cliff. Medics waiting below could hardly believe what they were seeing. How many had he saved? 20, 30. They lost count. Darkness fell completely. Doss continued by feel and memory, navigating the devastated ridge by the sound of moaning men. He found soldiers the daylight search had missed, men hiding in shell craters, men who'd crawled into crevices seeking shelter. He found them all. One more. One more. One more. At some point, Doss realized he'd covered the entire ridge. He'd found every living American soldier on that plateau. Some he'd sent down the cliff. Others were beyond help. He'd given them morphine to ease their passing. But he'd searched every meter of that killing ground. As he prepared to descend the cargo nets himself, Doss heard a sound. Japanese voices. Very close. He froze, pressing himself into the coral rock. Enemy soldiers walked past, so close he could have reached out and touched them. They were searching for Americans to kill, to take as prisoners, to torture for information. Doss held his breath. The voices faded. He waited another 10 minutes, then began his descent. At the base of the cliff, medics and officers stared at him in disbelief. They'd been counting the wounded as they came down. 75 men. 75 soldiers that would have died on that ridge if not for one unarmed medic who refused to leave them behind. The commanders of the 77th Infantry Division faced a dilemma. Hacksaw Ridge had to be taken, but the first assault had failed catastrophically. Morale was shattered. Men who'd survived the carnage were in no condition to try again. The entire operation teetered on the edge of collapse. Then word spread about what Desmond Doss had done. 75 men saved. 75 sons, brothers, husbands pulled from certain death by a soldier who'd been scorned, abused, called a coward. The same men who'd thrown boots at him during basic training now looked at him with something approaching awe. Captain Jack Glover, who'd once tried to have Doss discharged as mentally unfit, sought him out. He apologized. He admitted he'd been wrong about Doss, wrong about courage, wrong about what made a real soldier. Others followed. The respect wasn't grudging anymore. It was genuine, earned through actions that spoke louder than any words. 3 days later, on May 2nd, the 77th Infantry Division attacked Hacksaw Ridge again. This time, Desmond Doss insisted on a change to the battle plan. He asked the division to delay the assault by an hour on Saturday morning so he could observe his Sabbath through prayer. His commanders, the same officers who'd once ridiculed his faith, agreed without hesitation. The entire division waited while Private Desmond Doss prayed. The second assault succeeded, with Doss moving among them, treating wounds, offering encouragement. The soldiers of the 77th Infantry fought with renewed determination. They secured the ridge top. They pushed inland. They broke the back of the Japanese defensive line. The path to Shuri Castle lay open. But the battle wasn't finished with Desmond Doss. During the consolidation of the ridge, he was treating wounded soldiers when an enemy grenade landed beside him. Instead of diving for cover, Doss kicked the grenade away from the men he was treating. It exploded, shredding his legs with shrapnel. He bandaged his own wounds and continued working. Hours later, a Japanese sniper's bullet shattered his left arm. Doss splinted the arm using a rifle stock, then endured a 5-hour wait for evacuation. During that wait, when an artillery barrage wounded another soldier nearby, Doss crawled off his stretcher and gave it to the more seriously injured man. He waited another hour before stretcher bearers returned for him. By the time Doss was evacuated from Okinawa, he'd lost 50 pounds. Tuberculosis, contracted during recovery, would cost him a lung and 5 ribs. He would spend 5.5 years in veterans' hospitals. The shrapnel in his legs would cause pain for the rest of his life. But he survived. On October 12, 1945, President Harry Truman presented Desmond Doss with the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. Doss was the first and remains the only conscientious objector to receive the award. The citation reads in part, "He was a company aide man when the 1st Battalion assaulted a jagged escarpment 400 feet high. As our troops gained the summit, a heavy concentration of artillery, mortar and machine gun fire crashed into them, inflicting approximately 75 casualties and driving the others back. Private Doss refused to seek cover and remained in the fire-swept area with the many stricken, carrying them one by one to the edge of the escarpment and there lowering them on a rope-supported litter down the face of a cliff to friendly hands." The citation continues for several paragraphs, detailing other acts of heroism during the Okinawa campaign. But it's the image of those 75 men, lowered one by one down a rope in the darkness, that captures the essence of Desmond Doss's courage. His commanding officer, Captain Glover, later reflected, "He was the bravest man I ever met. He went through combat without carrying a weapon, which is unheard of. I don't think there's ever been another soldier quite like him." The story of Desmond Doss challenges fundamental assumptions about courage, strength, and what it means to serve. In a war defined by firepower, a conflict where military might was measured in tanks, artillery pieces, and bombers, one man proved that moral conviction could be as powerful as any weapon. His actions at Hacksaw Ridge occurred during a pivotal moment in military and human history. The Battle of Okinawa was the last major engagement before the planned invasion of mainland Japan. The casualties on both sides were staggering. Over 12,000 Americans killed, over 100,000 Japanese military personnel dead, and somewhere between 40,000 and 150,000 Okinawan civilians killed in the crossfire. The carnage on Okinawa played a significant role in President Truman's decision to authorize the use of atomic weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Within that larger tragedy, Desmond Doss represented something different, a reminder that humanity persists even in the most dehumanizing circumstances. While others killed, he healed. While others advanced with rifles, he advanced with bandages and plasma. While others left the wounded behind, he stayed until he'd saved every last one. His legacy extends beyond his individual heroism. Doss helped change military policy regarding conscientious objectors. Before the Second World War, refusing to bear arms was often treated as cowardice or sedition. After Doss, the military began to recognize that moral objection to killing could coexist with physical courage and dedication to duty. The combat medical badge he wore, typically reserved for armed combat soldiers, now clearly includes medics among those who face enemy fire. He also demonstrated something profound about the relationship between faith and service. Doss never preached or proselytized. He simply lived his convictions with absolute consistency. When his fellow soldiers mocked him, he didn't argue theology. He proved his courage under fire. When officers tried to force him out, he didn't claim victimhood. He persevered until he earned their respect. His faith wasn't something he talked about. It was something he embodied through action. After the war, Doss returned to Virginia. He married Dorothy Schutte, his longtime sweetheart, and they raised one son together. He worked as a carpenter like his father, though his injuries made physical labor increasingly difficult. He struggled with the long-term effects of tuberculosis. He faced ongoing health challenges from his war wounds. But he never regretted his service or his convictions. For decades, Doss lived in relative obscurity. He occasionally spoke to church groups or veteran organizations, but his story remained largely unknown outside military circles. The culture of the 1950s and 1960s, focused on nuclear might and conventional warfare, had little room for narratives about unarmed heroes. That began to change in the 1990s as historians and documentarians rediscovered his story. In 2004, he was featured in the documentary, The Conscientious Objector. In 2016, director Mel Gibson released Hacksaw Ridge, a feature film starring Andrew Garfield as Doss. The film brought his story to a global audience, earning 6 Academy Award nominations and winning 2. By then, Doss had passed away. He died on March 23, 2006, at the age of 87. He was buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery, not far from the site of his Medal of Honor citation ceremony. His grave marker bears the Medal of Honor emblem, a 5-pointed star suspended from a light blue ribbon with 13 white stars. The men Desmond Doss saved carried their gratitude for the rest of their lives. Years after the war, at veteran reunions, they would seek him out. They wanted to shake his hand, to introduce him to their children and grandchildren, to say thank you one more time. Some could still remember the exact moment Doss found them on that ridge. The relief of seeing his face appear out of the darkness, the sound of his voice offering reassurance, the feeling of being lowered down the cliff on that rope sling. One soldier, James Doris, later recalled, "I was shot through both legs. I couldn't move. The pain was incredible. I thought I was going to die up there. Then I heard Doss calling out, asking if anyone needed help. I called back, and he crawled over to me through all that fire. He bandaged my legs, gave me morphine, and told me I was going to be okay. Then he dragged me to the edge and lowered me down. I never forgot that. Never will." Another, Clarence Glenn, remembered, "We all thought Doss was crazy at first. Who goes into combat without a weapon? But after Hacksaw, we understood. He didn't need a weapon. His courage was something else entirely. It was purer than ours. We fought because we had to. He fought because he chose to save lives instead of take them. That takes a different kind of strength." Captain Glover's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. The officer who'd once considered Doss the worst soldier he'd ever commanded became one of his most vocal advocates. In later years, Glover would say, "I tried everything I could to get rid of him. I thought he'd be a liability, get himself killed, maybe get others killed trying to save him. I was completely wrong. He saved my life too, you know. When I was wounded during the fighting at Shuri, it was Doss who treated me. I remember looking up at him and thinking, this is the man I tried to destroy. I felt ashamed. Still do." Doss himself remained humble about his actions. When asked how he managed to save so many men, he would simply say, "I was praying the whole time. I just kept praying, Lord, help me get one more." He never claimed personal credit, never suggested he was extraordinary. To him, he'd simply done what he was called to do, serve God by serving his fellow man. His wife Dorothy understood the cost of that service better than anyone. She watched him struggle with nightmares, with pain from his injuries, with a long, slow decline from tuberculosis and its treatment. She saw him working as a carpenter despite shattered bones and damaged lungs, refusing to accept disability compensation because he felt others needed it more. She knew the weight of those memories he carried, not just the men he saved, but the ones he couldn't save, the ones who died despite everything he tried to do. But she also saw his peace. Unlike many combat veterans, Doss didn't drink to forget, didn't rage at invisible enemies, didn't withdraw from the world. His faith had carried him through the war intact. He'd gone to hell and come back with his soul undamaged. That, perhaps more than the Medal of Honor or the 75 lives saved, was his greatest victory. One story captures the essence of who Desmond Doss was. Years after the war, he was speaking to a group of students about his experiences. One student asked, "If you had it to do over again, would you carry a weapon?" Doss thought for a moment, then replied, "No, because then I would have had to make a choice. Who do I shoot? Who do I save?" This way, there was no choice. Everyone I saw, I tried to save. That's simpler. That's clearer. That's what I was meant to do. The volcanic rock of Hacksaw Ridge still bears the scars of that April morning. Bullet holes pock the coral. Shell craters mark where mortar rounds exploded. The cargo nets are long gone, but the cliff face remains, 400 feet of jagged limestone rising from the Okinawan landscape. Today, the ridge is a peaceful place. Wind whispers through the grass that covers the old battlefield. Birds nest in the crevices where men once hid from machine gun fire. Japanese and American tourists visit together, walking the same ground where their grandfathers tried to kill each other. Peace memorials stand at various points, reminding visitors of the cost of war and the value of reconciliation. But if you know where to look, you can still see the traces. The spot where the cargo nets were anchored. The Japanese cave entrances, now sealed. The outline of old fortifications. And at the edge of the escarpment, if you stand quiet and still, you can almost hear the echo of a rope creaking under the weight of wounded men being lowered to safety, one by one, through the darkness. Desmond Doss proved something essential about the nature of heroism. Courage doesn't require weapons. Strength doesn't demand violence. Service doesn't need hatred of the enemy to fuel dedication to one's comrades. He demonstrated that conviction, real, tested, absolute conviction, can accomplish things that firepower alone never could. The 75 men he saved went home to Virginia and Texas and California and Iowa. They married, had children, built lives. Those children had children of their own. Today, hundreds of people exist because one unarmed medic refused to leave wounded soldiers behind. Hundreds of families trace their lineage back to a single night on a ridge in Okinawa when death seemed certain and rescue impossible. That's his real legacy, not the Medal of Honor, not the movie, not the place in history books. It's the lives, the continuity, the refusal to accept that any man was beyond saving. In a war that killed millions, in a battle that destroyed thousands, one man insisted that every individual life mattered. That every soldier, no matter how badly wounded, deserved a chance to live. That no one should die alone on a ridge in the darkness. The inscription on his grave marker is simple: Desmond T. Doss, Medal of Honor, U.S. Army, World War II. It doesn't mention Hacksaw Ridge. It doesn't list the 75 lives saved. It doesn't need to. His actions speak across the decades with a clarity that needs no embellishment. In the end, Desmond Doss understood something profound about what it means to be a soldier. The ultimate purpose of military service isn't to take life, it's to preserve it. To protect home, family, freedom, the future. He simply chose to pursue that purpose more directly than most. While others killed to protect, he protected without killing. While others brought death to the enemy, he brought life to his friends. One man, one conviction, one night, 75 lives saved. And a lesson about courage that echoes through history, reminding us that the strongest weapon isn't made of steel. It's made of faith, determination, and an unbreakable commitment to doing what's right, no matter the cost. Hacksaw Ridge remembers. The Army remembers. The nation remembers. And every descendant of those 75 men carries forward the living legacy of a soldier who proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to carry a weapon at all.